Thank you so much, Kathy. That's Kathy Keats, the publisher of Headline Books, and it's always a pleasure to work with Headline and all the great authors around the country as we all shelter in place and we talk books. And today's guest is one of my favorite fellas. He is a native of West Virginia, but for many years has resided down south in Alabama and was a field agent and SWAT team member for his entire career with the FBI. He's written about that as well. Our guest is Jack Owens, and Jack has a very colorful past. He also was a contestant on CBS Television's Big Brother. We're going to get into all that, including his books, including his POC series about serial killers. Those are fictional novels, and his memoir of his time in the FBI. Jack Owens, welcome to Zoom Into Books.
Hello, Burke. It's always a good time to talk to you. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, you're very welcome. And by the way, if any of Jack's books are of an interest to you, then be sure to get in touch with the folks at Headline Books, and they'll be able to get the books right to you. And Jack will even personally inscribe those books for you. So, Jack, let's go all the way back and talk about how you first got into law enforcement. Right out of college, you were actually a law student. Is that right?
I was, Burke. I was in law school at the University of Alabama and decided to either practice law in the Navy or go into the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover was the director, and he was involved in recruiting new agents for the summer of 1969, and I was one of them. And I sent my application in, and he accepted it. And it started my 30-year career.
30 years. So that was really the only real job you ever had in your life. Is that right?
Yes. Bert, you and I have laughed about this. The only job I have ever had as an adult, particularly post-law school, was the FBI. And I made the right decision. I would not have left if I hadn't run into mandatory retirement.
So after retirement, you've gone on to write many, many books, but they were informed by your time with the FBI. So, one might ask the question, looking back on it, was it the right thing to do to be an FBI agent as opposed to pursuing a career as an attorney?
It was the right thing to do in many respects. I did not want to practice law. And when I came into the FBI, it gave me a world of material to use in my writing career. I was very interested in being a writer, but FBI agents can't publish. So I decided to go ahead and do a 25 or 30-year career and then start publishing my books, which is what I did. I had 30 years in the Bureau.
Let's look back at that career in the FBI as we talk with author Jack Owens about his long FBI career. And let's talk about some highlights of your time in the FBI. You actually went in at the end of an era. J. Edgar Hoover was still the director of the FBI whenever you started. Is that right?
He was. I entered the Bureau in 1969, right out of law school, Burke. And J. Edgar Hoover was director until April 1972. He died in his sleep, and we've had a succession of directors since then, many. And my 30 years included a number of directors, all following J. Edgar Hoover. And I structured my career basically the way I wanted to do it: SWAT team and counterintelligence and terrorism.
We're looking at a couple of photos, Jack, on the screen now of you in the FBI, and the one on the left, you're wearing a ball cap, and it looks like you're surrounded by some of the guys from the FBI SWAT team. Tell me about that. That's an elite unit within the FBI. What sort of physical and other training did you have to go through to make SWAT?
The physical training is intense, as you might expect, Burke. It involves 2 weeks at the FBI Academy at Marine Corps Base Quantico, where all agents train either initially or as you get additional training. I loved SWAT training. I loved going through it, the discipline of it, and it stayed with me through my whole career. I thought being in SWAT would allow me to engage in some special operations, and it did. It involved specifically 2 major prison riots and many other cases.
Let's talk about that, the prison riots. That sounds like a dangerous duty.
Well, it looked very dangerous at the time. The Atlanta prison riot was in 1988. It was a major riot. 1,000 inmates rioted and took 100 hostages. SWAT teams from all over America were there to free those hostages and put down the riot, as well as the National Hostage Rescue Team, the Bureau's first-round draft choices. SWAT teams were there the whole time to form a perimeter around the wall of the prison to keep the inmates from getting out. And as negotiations went on to free the hostages, they were successful. The negotiators got the inmates to surrender. They came out of the prison peacefully. We did not have to fire a shot. No one was injured. It's just the way you want an operation to go.
Is there a time more than any other in that 30 years when you remember being scared as an FBI agent, something that really shook you to your core?
Well, your listeners may find this amusing, but I'm afraid of birds, Burke. And one time, I have a phobia about them, wings flapping about my face. I had to go into a backyard in Colorado early in my career. I had to walk through what seemed like thousands and thousands of chickens in a backyard to get to a fugitive to arrest him. I was by myself, and I was thinking, my gun only has 6 rounds in it. I'm not going to be able to shoot all these chickens. So I walked through that backyard just terrified. I'm happy to tell you that I did make it through that yard and made the arrest, and it worked out fine.
That I'm not even quite sure what to say about that. I'm rarely at a loss for words, but a guy that has pursued serial killers and worked underground and undercover with the FBI and been in a SWAT team, and he's afraid of chickens. I'm not even sure what to say about that.
My colleagues were highly amused by that, as were my bosses. And how in the world have you gotten through new agents training and everything else you've done, as you said, Burke, and be afraid of chickens? Well, I never had to arrest a chicken. I've never been confronted by one since I was an agent, except for that walk through the backyard in Colorado. I hated every second of it.
Jack Owens is our guest today. We're talking books, and we're talking about his 30-year career with the FBI as a SWAT team member out of the Birmingham field office, and he's written a multitude of books, including a memoir of his time in the FBI, a fascinating book about John F. Kennedy's last ride, and a trilogy of novels about a serial killer in the Deep South named Pac, and we're going to talk about all those. If you'd like to get an autographed copy of any of Jack's books, visit headlinebooks.com. That's headlinebooks.com, and look up Jack Owens on the website. All right, Jack, in the FBI, you did work undercover, and that's probably why there are not a whole lot of photos of you and your time in the FBI. Now that this is in your rearview mirror, I'm not sure how much you can talk about that time, but tell me a little bit about your most memorable undercover operation.
I think my most memorable one turned out to be successful. I worked against some hostile intelligence services during the Cold War. These were communist countries, and they were trying to engage the FBI through our intelligence services. I developed a contact and a target for my operation working undercover. I had backstopping, a background investigation that set me up in business in Birmingham. And I spent 4 years on this operation, and it was successful up to a point. And we did not engage him enough to what we hoped he would do, that is turn in our favor and help us against his own country. That's a hard thing to do, as you might imagine. We all have loyalties, and but it was successful in terms of getting information on his intelligence operation, but not getting him over on our side. So I feel like that worked well for 4 years. I'm proud of that operation. I also worked undercover in some criminal cases and some terrorism cases, but I think the most successful one was during the Cold War against the other side.
Our guest is Jack Owens, retired FBI agent and author. And if you'd like to pick up an autographed copy of any of Jack's books, visit him at headlinebooks.com, and Jack will personally inscribe those for you. And if you have a question for Jack during our Facebook Live Zoom into Books interview, we would love to hear from you. Just type your question or comment in, and we'll share those with Jack during the broadcast today. I'm Burke Allen for Headline Books and Allen Media Strategies in Washington, D.C. And on the screen now, Jack, is something you did right after you retired from the FBI. You, of all things, became a contestant on the CBS television show Big Brother. And
Yes.
I have to ask what an FBI guy who spent so much time being undercover is doing on a national television show, which is the furthest thing from being undercover. You're being watched 24/7 on TV. How did that happen?
I was. That's an amazing thought. It's a thought that engaged me too, and I thought it was funny to try out for that show. But I was chosen. I auditioned. I was chosen for the cast of Big Brother 4, and it involved doing a lot of interviewing. But CBS people interviewed me, and I found the process engaging, a lot of fun. And I also knew that having been undercover in the Bureau where no one could know my identity, I went on a show, CBS Big Brother, which aired 3 times a week. Each episode had 7 million viewers. So I really changed what I was doing when I went into retirement.
How did you get the idea to go on Big Brother, or were you approached, or how did that actually happen?
My wife and I loved the show, Big Brother. We had watched previous seasons, and my thought was this, Burke. You know what that show is? It's a 3-month surveillance. And I had done 30 years of surveillances. I knew I could do it. I thought I would be successful. I was one of 14 cast members, and we competed to stay on the show. And I made it up to the last 5, but I really enjoyed my fellow cast members. They were sharp people, young people. They were half my age. I was 58 years old when I was on Big Brother. I thoroughly enjoyed the nearly 3 months as a cast member, and came home after the show was over. I did not win all that money, Bert. I did not win that $500,000.
Jack, I'm sorry to hear that, but I have to ask you, in your background, though, you seem to be a pretty level-headed guy. I mean, for crying out loud, you were a 30-year FBI agent. These days it seems like they fire the FBI directors on a pretty regular basis. If you're able to hang in there that entire time and make it to the top 5 on Big Brother, aren't all the people on those reality TV shows just a little bit crazy? Don't you have to be sort of nuts to be on one of those shows? I mean, no offense intended.
Yes, CBS gave me an extensive battery of psychological tests to see if I was crazy enough to go on the show. And I'm happy to advise you, Bert, that I passed those tests.
Sure, no one is happier than your wife, Pat, so that's good.
Right. Pat was my most loyal supporter when I was on the show. She of course, could only watch on TV. She couldn't be there, but she watched all the episodes and even recorded them for me. And as I watched myself perform for nearly 3 months with the other cast members, I was thinking, they ran around circles around me, and I can see why. Those kids were terrific. They treated me like a relic, like a mascot. the whole time. I had a great time on that show. I recommend people try out for Big Brother.
A relic. I love it. Jack Owens, our guest today, retired FBI agent and author on Zoom Into Books with Headline Books. I'm Burke Allen from Allen Media Strategies. If you'd like an autographed book from Jack, he'd be happy to inscribe it for you, and may even use some sort of secret FBI calligraphy. I'm not sure. You're an undercover guy. So one last question on Big Brother that I've always wondered about that show. I mean, were those cameras really on 24/7, and did you really not have any exposure with the outside world other than what we saw on TV, or was that somewhat, dummied up for the cameras? Give me the inside skinny on what it's really like to be on Big Brother.
Those cameras are on 24 hours a day. We are totally isolated with only each other to talk to, and we quickly got on each other's nerves, which is what the brass at Big Brother wants. It's what CBS wants. A lot of mayhem and craziness on the show. It's good for ratings. And I found out later that I got on the show because they were looking for an older guy who was in law enforcement that season. And I fit the bill. As I mentioned, I was 58, went through a lot of pre-testing and auditioning to get on the show. But Bert, being in the FBI got me on the show. More so than my personality or me, it was being a former agent that helped me do it.
Retired FBI agent Jack Owens, our guest today. All right, we've talked about Big Brother. I'd love to see some of these other photos in our slideshow, and also talk about the books. What was the first book you wrote?
The first book I wrote was one I felt I had to write, and it was a memoir of my 30 years in the Bureau, 3 decades. And the title of it is odd for a memoir. It's called "Don't Shoot, We're Republicans." And it was about a roadblock I was involved in where we arrested a guy and went to a second car behind him. We didn't know who was in the second car. We opened the door. This is late at night, Burke, and the dome light came on in the car. In the front seat were 2 elderly ladies dressed to the nines, bless their hearts. And they threw their hands up in the air because we were pointing shotguns at them and said, "Don't shoot, we're Republicans." So needless to say, we didn't shoot. We told them they were free to go. We were sorry to have bothered them, but it did give me a terrific title for a book, didn't it?
I've told you this before, and I will stick with it. I believe "Don't Shoot, We're Republicans" may be my favorite book title in the history of book titles. What a great story.
It's a great story. My career I consider a great story in terms of satisfaction in doing my work. I had the best job in the world, Bert, and they let me do it for 30 years. And as we say in the FBI, they even paid us.
I love those kinds of jobs. Retired FBI agent Jack Owens, and we're looking at the cover of "Don't Shoot, We're Republicans" now on the screen. The true story of the FBI agent who did things his way. If you'd like an autographed copy from Jack, visit headlinebooks.com and they will hook you up. Love that story. Don't shoot, we're Republicans. All right. I've got an author friend who's a retired Green Beret Special Forces guy, and another one who's a retired Navy SEAL. And in order to have their books written, they actually have to get Department of Defense clearance in order to release those books. And it's a laborious process to take it through the federal government. Did you have to do anything like that with the FBI before you released this book? And if so, were there things that had to be redacted from the book?
I did have to do that. And there were some things that were not redacted, but I was forced to eliminate them from the book itself. They came out of the manuscript. But I'll tell you, Bert, there weren't that many chapters that were eliminated. My pre-publication review was FBI headquarters, and it was done in record time. I learned later, My pre-publication review only lasted for little less than 30 days. It was unheard of. And the reason I was told was because there was so much really great and interesting humor in the book, if I may say. It got me through in record time. The people who reviewed the book at headquarters called me laughing about some of the chapters. They just loved what I had written about the Bureau. Law enforcement is a lot of stress. Nothing happens, and then everything happens. To relieve that stress, law enforcement from city to state to federal level is chock full of humor. I love the humor and good fellowship of my fellow agents, the men and women who backed me up and worked with me, and I worked with them. I love the humor in the FBI. At one point when we were going to storm the Talladega prison to put it into a riot in Talladega, we were watching a movie, a funny movie about police, and before we stormed the prison. It's that kind of humor, a stress reliever, that I coveted in my job. I love the people I was working with, but the humor stood out, and it was humor that I wrote about in my memoir.
So this book, Don't Shoot With Republicans, was your first foray, and
Yes.
I thought about you a lot as an author and as someone who's lived a very interesting life. In the last several years, the FBI has been in the news a whole bunch, and I want to get your take on a couple of those things before we talk about your fiction novels, which you can see on the screen as well, the whole trilogy of the Pock books.
Okay. Okay.
So, first of all, Robert Mueller, that whole investigation, and you can get political or not, but I'm curious as to what you thought about him and about the way that all played out, as well as Comey.
I did not know Comey. Haven't gotten to know the directors who followed my retirement, but I have met them briefly and talked to them. I can state, and I will state emphatically, the FBI is not political. We don't view our job as political. We do what we're told. We handle our assigned cases. I never did think during my 30 years that politics hampered my work or involved me in politics. If I may say, I did not care when I was an agent who the president was or who the attorney general was. I wanted to do my work, and I did my work. And I think that the men and women in the FBI are wonderful to this day. I think they're sharper and even better than they were when I was an agent. And I want to praise my middle son, who has gone beyond my record of 30 years in the FBI. He's in the FBI now. I love the work he's doing. I'm so proud of him. I was proud of my colleagues. I've been proud of the Bureau since I was sworn in. There's no corruption in the FBI. We are not political.
The FBI is often portrayed very heroically. Occasionally, though, they take it on the chin in Hollywood. And there was a movie last year, the Richard Jewell movie about the Atlanta Olympic bombing in '96. It was a Clint Eastwood movie. It was a great movie, fun to watch, but the FBI certainly did not come across looking good there. And you were actually in the South, and you worked in and around that case. I'm curious as to your thoughts on the FBI's portrayal in the Richard Jewell movie.
I was over in Atlanta for a while with the SWAT team when the bombing went off over there. And then, coincidentally, Eric Rudolph, the guy who set the bomb off in Atlanta, he set one off in Birmingham. And I was over here in Birmingham when that bomb went off. I was heavily involved in the case, and I did not appreciate the way the FBI was portrayed in Clint Eastwood's movie. Having an agent in effect would have been throwing his career away for having sex with a female reporter in Atlanta. I just don't think an agent would ever do that. They had the best job in the world, and to get involved in that scheme to ask a reporter for information and to give information to a reporter on what the FBI was doing. I would have never done that. And I don't know anybody who would have done that. None of my colleagues would have.
Did the FBI get it wrong on Richard Jewell? As you said, the real bomber was Eric Rudolph, and in the movie it was portrayed that they really sort of destroyed this guy's life, and he didn't get it back in many ways, and it was sort of an indictment on the FBI as well as the media at that time. So, look, people are going to get it wrong. Did the FBI get it wrong with Richard Jewell? Should they have not taken this guy down to that extent?
Yes, we did get it wrong. We had the wrong suspect initially, and then eventually we got on to Eric Rudolph, and he was the real bomber, and we put him in the prison. Burke, I feel bad about Richard Jewell. He was a very likable guy. That part of it was portrayed correctly by Clint Eastwood in the movie. Richard Jewell was a nice guy. He was doing his job as a security officer when the bomb went off. He discovered the bomb, and thank goodness he got away from it, physically got away from the bomb, and when it went off, he was not injured, but it did injure others, one fatally. Richard Jewell, when he was initially identified by the FBI as a suspect, he was a suspect only. We do that in major cases. We identify suspects, we investigate them, and either eliminate them or move on with them. And Jewell was eliminated as a suspect, and we moved on to Eric Rudolph. And if I could right now, I would apologize to him. He's deceased, but I do apologize on behalf of my investigation in Atlanta and what was done by the FBI in general. We did not mean to harm him in any way.
And eventually, with your help, the FBI's help there in Birmingham, you got the right guy eventually with Eric Rudolph. Another high-profile case that's getting renewed interest now because of this documentary series on HBO is this horrible Atlanta child serial killer case from the late 70s, the Wayne Williams case. And you were very closely involved in that. They actually sent you to Atlanta to work on that. Tell us about your involvement in the Wayne Williams case.
I was sent to Atlanta to work that case after it had been ongoing for several years. The FBI profiler at Quantico thought that the perpetrator, who was Wayne Williams, would start dumping bodies of these beautiful children into the river, the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta. That case is horrible. No parent should ever have to bury a child. Too many children were killed in Atlanta by Wayne Williams. My part was to sit on the bridges for 2 weeks, sundown to sun up, and doggone it, as I think about how far-fetched that seemed at times. I was there the night we arrested Wayne Williams. I was one bridge away. Williams fell into law enforcement trap. The trap was set by having agents and police officers in a static, covert, undercover surveillance. We could not be seen by anyone or identified. And one bridge upstream from my bridge, at the Jackson Parkway Bridge, my FBI colleague, saw Wayne Williams drive out onto the bridge, get something very large out of his station wagon. My colleague could not see what was in the garbage bag that contained the body, Nathaniel Cater. And Williams threw the body over into the river. A police cadet down on the river bank heard a large splash, and that's how the case got started against Williams. That's how we identified who he was. He was stopped as he pulled away from the bridge that night, and we never let him go, Bert. We chewed on him and stayed close to him, and bumper locked his life. Every time he made a move, we were on him, and then he was finally arrested and convicted. Wayne Williams killed some of those children, not all of them, but some of them. There's some speculation that he killed 30. I don't think that's the correct number. I think it's less than 30, maybe less than 20. But we know, the FBI knows, law enforcement knows that Wayne Williams committed some of those murders. I'm glad he's in prison, and he's doing life, and he's not going to get out.
Our guest is Jack Owens on Zoom Into Books, and we're talking about his 30-year career in the FBI and his involvement in some of the most famous cases in the Bureau's history. His book, Don't Shoot, We're Republicans, is available, and you can get it personally inscribed at headlinebooks.com. And as a matter of fact, Jack will be happy to sign any of his books for you. His books are available for just $14.95, or the Pac trilogy that you see on your screen that we're going to talk about next. You can get all three of those books for $29.95. It's our COVID-19 special, since we've all got a little extra time for reading. If you'd like to read the entire Pac trilogy, and Jack will sign those. The Pac books are books about a sort of misshapen, very unique serial killer in the Deep South, and I wonder if your time with the Bureau informed the way you built the character of Pac. You just talked about this horrible serial killer, Wayne Williams, that you were involved in the investigation on. How much of what you saw and you learned as an agent went into forming the Pac serial killer character for your Pac trilogy?
I think Pac was made possible in my mind, in my imagination, and the way I wrote him in 3 books. Made possible by my career as an agent in the FBI. I was involved in so many interesting cases with terrible, evil people, particularly the man here in Birmingham who sent a pipe bomb to a real good friend of mine, Judge Robert Vance, and blew up Judge Vance in his own kitchen in the Birmingham suburbs. These people, the people that particularly local law enforcement must face every day, day in and day out, many of them are evil. They're horrible people. They're dangerous. They're dangerous. And it's through the work starting at the local level, where law enforcement is the rubber that meets the road. Local police have a very tough job, tougher in many ways than FBI agents in federal law enforcement. But my career in 30 years gave me the material I needed to construct in my mind this character, Pac. I wanted him to be disfigured, and Pac was the name given to him when people mocked him. He was a career criminal with a very beat-up, jagged face. People called him Pac to mock him. He also had a club foot. He was crippled in that way. And he had a tough life growing up. And then he turned to crime and made his life even worse. He was a killer. He was smart. And he engaged people on his terms. Serial killers like the control. Almost all serial killers are white males. They like the control that they feel and are given by controlling other people's lives and making them beg for their lives. They're difficult to deal with in emotional terms. If you work enough serial killers, you're going to have to get a grip and kind of confront what you're seeing and deal with it. I thought that I could do a trilogy on this character, Pac, and I did. He's involved with all kinds of people, some really thoughtful, nice citizens, and he wrecks their lives. He stalks them, and he does away with them. In the end, I did not kill him off, Burke. I decided to leave him unbowed. I suppose there's room for a 4th Pac book, although I don't plan on doing that. But he's an interesting guy, Pac. He's an intellectual. He's very religious. He loves Jesus. He loves flowers. He talks to Jesus and he talks to flowers, and they talk back. He's heavily involved in the Bible. He's a Bible scholar, and he's a hypocrite. While professing this deep faith, he doesn't practice it at all. He's involved in homicides, and he should have nothing to do with the Bible, but his whole life is built around his religious beliefs and music. He loves Bulgarian opera. He listens to opera. He was an interesting guy to write about, and I enjoyed these topics, writing about them, doing the best I can do. Pac was challenging for me as a writer. I wanted to get it right. Pac became infatuated with a renowned female athlete at the University of Alabama. There was never any sex between them. The age difference was great, but Pac was infatuated by her, and I put her into the last two books of the trilogy, and it's interesting to have her weave in and out of his life with just friendship and nothing else involved.
Our guest is Jack Owens. We're talking about his Pac trilogy, about Pac the serial killer and his other books, all available during our Zoom Into Books broadcast. If you'd like to pick up a book by Jack Owens, then by all means do. There will be autograph for you. Jack's books are available for $14.95, or the entire three-book Pac trilogy for $29.95, again at headlinebooks.com. In recent years there have been, and I guess going way back in cinema, but there have been some very popular movies and television adaptations about serial killers, Silence of the Lambs, or the TV show Dexter. I know you've thought about it because every author thinks about it. What would a Pac movie look like to you? We had a great a great filmmaker who was actually just watching the broadcast, Danny Boyd, who's written and produced and directed several great movies. What would a Pac movie, or what would the character Pac look like? Do you have somebody in mind that would play Pac?
I do. I've always had this actor in mind, and the actor's name is John C. Reilly.
Sure.
He's a famous screen actor and a wonderful actor. He's tall like Pac, thick-shouldered and bulky, and he has an unusual face. It's a face that you do not forget. It's a rough-looking face, but doesn't prevent him, though, John C. Reilly, from doing terrific comedy. He did a movie with Woody Harrelson. It was just wonderful. And I've always liked Reilly's work. But as I thought about Pac on the screen, the big screen, I immediately thought about John C. Reilly. And I would be just so happy if one day, and encouraged, he would agree to play. We got a screen offer, but I was able to communicate with him through you, Bert. You did it, and tell him of our interest in the Pac trilogy. So it could happen one day, I hope, but I thank you for doing that for me.
It's my pleasure. And John C. Reilly, if you're watching, or Danny Boyd, the filmmaker, if you're watching, the Pac books would make a fantastic film, and they could all be rolled into one. All right, let's see what other interesting photos we have here. I hope there's a picture of your JFK book, because I found that one in particular fascinating. Tell us about your book on John F. Kennedy and how things came to you in that regard, because his assassination, I think, has fascinated folks for many years. The title of that book again?
It is Watchman, JFK's Last Ride. And I used Watchman as a code word for the assassination of JFK. In my book, unlike what really happened in Dallas, but in my book, there are 3 assassins in Dealey Plaza. Oswald is one of them. And the whole book is how the FBI runs to ground all 3 assassins. And in the end, the FBI spreads out around the world and puts an end to these 3 people. Of course, we know what happened to Oswald. He was murdered by Jack Ruby. In my book, that is not not part of the conspiracy, but Ruby was moved to do it for various reasons. But I loved Jack Kennedy. He was one of my heroes. I followed his life and presidency very closely. He inspired me in many ways, his wit, his grace under pressure, his intelligence. And I felt like my memoir, I just had to write this book, Burke. When I was an agent and could not publish, there were two books on my mind. One was my memoir, and the other was the assassination of John Kennedy. And I wrote that novel, Watchman, JFK's Last Ride, right after I finished my novel, my memoir rather, and it was published about 10 years ago. And I found it fascinating to write. It allowed me to express myself and get involved in my imagination concerning a case that still haunts me. I think about the assassination in Dallas. I think about it every day. I'm surrounded by books by JFK and photographs. I'm looking at them right now as I talk to you. I had to write that book, and I did.
Our guest, Jack Owens, has written many books, including that book about Kennedy's Last Ride, Don't Shoot We're Republicans, his Pac trilogy of books about Pac the serial killer. And if you're interested in any of Jack's books, they're available through our partnership with Headline Books. Visit headlinebooks.com. That's headlinebooks.com, and pick up any of the books from retired FBI agent, SWAT team member, undercover agent Jack Owens, and he can tell you in his book, Don't Shoot We're Republicans, about his 30-year career with the FBI. What a fascinating life you've had, Jack, and I appreciate you sharing some of that with us today on Zoom into Books. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you, Burke. Thanks for inviting me. It's a terrific interview. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Author Jack Owens, retired FBI agent, our guest on Zoom into Books today from Headline Books. And again, if you'd like one of Jack's books, you can pick it up at headlinebooks.com. That's headlinebooks.com. And Jack will personally inscribe it for you. For the whole Headline Books gang, Kathy and Ashley and Shaylee, thank you so much for watching. More great interviews on the way with Zoom into Books. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye, everybody.